Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for Harvard's virtual celebration of the 31st anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. My name is Kyle Shachmut. I lead our Harvard University IT Digital Accessibility Services team. And on behalf of a large team of hosts and collaborators, we want to welcome you to our conversation today. We're very happy that you're here. A couple of logistics items before we get underway. First, captions are available. If you would like to take advantage of them, you can turn them on in the captions or CC button in the toolbar. Secondly, part of our conversation today is a live question and answer session. And so we invite you to respond to comments that are being made, or if you have questions for panelists, you can submit them, again, via the Q&A feature in the toolbar of the webinar interface. So please feel free to submit questions for discussion among the group today. We have a wide variety of leaders on access and inclusion with us from across the university. So let's get started. Everybody has a role to play for accessibility and the inclusion of people with disabilities at Harvard. We are a very broad and wide-ranging institution, and that's why I'm really excited to introduce and to welcome our first speaker today, Larry Bacow, the president of Harvard. He's been our president for a little over 3 years, and previously he's held senior leadership institutions as the president of Tufts and the chancellor at MIT. He's a multiple-time graduate of Harvard, including the law school, the Kennedy School, and the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. So he's had many roles here with us on campus. And he is absolutely a leader in the higher education community and frequently writes and speaks on issues related to higher education leadership, to innovations in learning and teaching, to the impact of digital technologies on education, and to ways that universities are led and governed. All of those are really critical to the issues that we're going to be discussing today for access with people with disabilities. So, you know, we are enthusiastic to have him join us. Since his ascension to the presidency at Harvard in 2018, the university has definitely undertaken lots of efforts to promote inclusion and access. And so we are thrilled for his leadership in helping guide and steer those efforts, and look forward to hearing what he has to say. So thank you very much for joining us, President Larry Bacow. Larry?
Well, thank you very much, Kyle, for that very nice introduction. And thanks for all of your good work and those of your colleagues to address the critical issues that are represented by equal access for everyone. I'd like to say welcome, everyone. It's great to be here to celebrate the 31st anniversary of the Americans for Disabilities Act with all of you. I've had many occasions throughout my career to speak about the Jewish concept of tikkun olam, which literally translates as the obligation of each and every one of us to repair the world. I think the ADA represents that concept in action. It's not only enshrined in the law of the rights of people with disabilities, but I think it also articulates the goals to which the nation and its people, each and every one of us, the goals that we ought to aspire to. At Harvard, we've been working for many, many years to try and ensure equality of opportunity and full participation for all. This gathering of students, faculty and staff, of neighbors and allies is, I think, a testament to our commitment and to our care for each and every one of us. Understanding the need for accommodations and expanding our accessibility efforts, I think, makes it possible for everyone to be fully engaged in the life of the university as they contribute to our mission. In my inaugural address, I commented on the fact that I think talent tends to be broadly or flatly distributed in society, but sadly, opportunity is not. And sometimes it's not because of barriers that are erected for other people to achieve their full potential. Some of these barriers arise due to socioeconomic differences. Some of them arise due to overt discrimination based upon race or ethnicity. But some of them also arise because people are born with different abilities. And what the ADA has done is it's given everybody the opportunity to succeed, to achieve their potential, or at least that's what it's supposed to do, based upon their inherent ability and not some barrier that society has erected because it's failed to recognize their ability to thrive and to achieve. I'm proud of our collective efforts to repair the world, to help it fully embrace all the people who make it what it is. To be sure, there's lots more to be done, but I hope you'll take this moment to acknowledge your successes and each and every one who's contributed to our collective success. Now we're going to hear from our Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, Sherri Charleston, who's fast approaching her one-year anniversary at Harvard. I think I speak for everyone, Sherri, who's had the opportunity to work with you, to get to know you, that you've already made a profound impact on this place. And you've done so by barely having set foot on our campus in person. I can't wait to see what you're going to do in the future once we can all sit down and work together in person. So Sherri, take it away. It's all yours. And thank you very much again for the opportunity to be part of this special gathering.
Thank you, Larry. And thank you so much for that warm welcome and introduction to everyone here. It has really been a pleasure to work with you and to work in partnership with you over the course of the past year to advance this important work, which is so important to both of us. Thank you to the organizers for having me here today. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be with you and to join you. As Larry said, I'm coming up on my one-year anniversary here on campus, and I have been so thrilled and heartened to work with several people who are on this call today to advance the important work relative to supporting individuals with disabilities on campus. So it is really a privilege and an honor to be with you today as we celebrate the 31st anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. As you all know, over the course of the last 31 years, the ADA has really made it possible for everyone with a disability to live a life of greater freedom and equality. After the ADA was passed, it really became the first comprehensive declaration of equality for people with disabilities. And so it is fitting that we gather yearly to celebrate and to think about the road ahead and what stands before us. There are 54 million Americans who have a disability. That's nearly 19%, or 1 in every 5 residents. And that number will continue to grow as the population continues to acquire disabilities, often as a result of things like aging or disabilities relative to military service. My point is that ensuring that people with disabilities have equal access in all aspects of employment, whether it's employment, public services, transportation, private accommodation, access to buildings, all of that should matter to all of us, not just because it affects some members of our community, but because inevitably it will affect almost all members of our community. So as Larry said, as you know, here at Harvard, we've really committed ourselves to thinking strategically about how we can make sure that all members of our community, particularly members of our community who have disabilities, can thrive. We have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work ahead of us, but I am always heartened by members of this community in particular who I've worked in partnership with, that we can make progress and we can continue to identify the work ahead of us, and to set measurable goals that will allow us to make sure that we're continuing to make progress as we move forward together. I hope that as we continue to, some of you have heard me talk about our commitment to inclusive excellence being a journey. And as we continue on this journey together, as we continue on the journey to make sure that we're fostering a campus culture where everyone can thrive, I hope that we will continue, or perhaps start, to think about the ways in particular that the intersections of various aspects of identity, from race to disability, to sex to gender, affects the way that we create an inclusive working, learning, and living environment and culture. In doing so, we will be able to ensure that members of our community can bring their whole selves and can achieve a greater sense of inclusion and belonging. Achieving this goal will require all of us. And I am so grateful, as I said, to the network of collaborators who have already been leading the way. And I just want to take this moment to thank you for all of your work, from University Disability Resources to the FAS Accessible Education Office, people who are on this call today, the library, Hewitt's Digital Accessibility Services team, the Ability Plus Affinity Group, all who are part of today's program. This is just a sort of small sampling of some of the leaders on campus who have been doing this multi-layered work. And so if you remember nothing else, please know that I am here to say thank you. Thank you for all of your work, for your tireless efforts, and for the way that you help us to think more critically about the policies, about our practices, and about the ways that we can truly make sure that Harvard University is a place where everyone can thrive. So thank you so much for your work today. Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. And I look forward to being with you all today, and again, next year. That said, I want to turn it over to the panelists to kick off this wonderful discussion. And so Amy, Kyle, it's over to you.
Thanks so much, Sherri, for that great introduction. And thank you as well to Larry for being with us today. So I'm Amy Dushane. I'm the head of UX and digital accessibility for Harvard Library, and I will be the moderator for our panel discussion. My work in the libraries is focused on digital accessibility. We work with students with disabilities regularly to test things like Hollis, making sure that it's accessible to everyone. And the library also recently completed a renovation project of the Houghton Library, making it accessible to all. So I'm going to introduce you to our panelists, and then we're going to have some discussion, and then I will open it up for a Q&A later on. So our first panelist is Grace Moskola, who is the director of Harvard's Accessible Education Office, Kyle Shachmut, who is the assistant director of digital accessibility services for Harvard University IT, and Kate Upetham, who is the director of University Disability Resources and 504 coordinator. And I'm going to let them each tell you a little bit more about their work, starting with Grace.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me. My office, the Accessible Education Office, we serve all students with disabilities, invisible and visible disabilities at Harvard College, GSAS and Cs. We work with a population of over 1,000 students, and I'm happy to be here and be part of the panel.
So I'm Kyle Shachmut from Hewitt and Digital Accessibility Services. We have a wonderful team in Hewitt that promotes digital access and helps lead trainings and coordinate functions across all of the different schools at the university to help increase the capacity to make accessible, inclusive digital content. We're a relatively new team at the university. We've been around, we're just starting our 3rd year at the university. So we are always excited to get to know new and exciting work happening or ways that we can help promote access at the many different parts of Harvard.
And I'm Kate, Director of University Disability Resources. Our office is located within central administration, and we're here to serve as sort of experts in the development and implementation of best practices and promising practices related to disability across the institution. So we do that work by partnering with offices like Grace's and Kyle's, human resources, Hewitt, planning, transportation, really all aspects of the institution, our schools, local disability coordinators as well. We provide trainings, and we're there for planning to be proactive in this space, but also, for example, in COVID, we've been thinking about the return to campus and how things might change and getting ahead of what that might look like. And then also when there are complex matters related to disability, we're here to partner on figuring out a best solution or next steps.
Thanks, everybody. So to start our conversation today, can you talk a little bit about how accessibility work fits into Harvard's overall commitment to diversity, inclusion, and belonging?
Absolutely. I think Dr. Charleston did a great job of setting up sort of that concept. And I think it's helpful to think about how Harvard defines inclusive excellence, which is it's a community that draws on the widest possible pool of talent to unify excellence and diversity, one that fully embraces individuals from varied backgrounds, cultures, races, identities, life experiences, perspectives, beliefs, and values. The aspiration to achieve inclusive excellence moves beyond the goal of non-discrimination and toward an embrace of the value that flows from bringing diversity of experience and thought to campus, and the rich and varied forms of excellence that can emerge from that diversity. So I think there's, sort of two parts. Accessibility is about the first step, which is removing barriers so that people can enter the space. And it's about providing accommodations where needed so people are able to have that equal opportunity to participate in the programs and activities at Harvard. Inclusion goes a step beyond that. It's more than just giving people access to the space. It's about proactively bringing people in from diverse backgrounds. And that would, of course, include people with disabilities. I think doing that results in having more talent and skills being brought into the Harvard environment and people being given the opportunity to reach their full potential. And it really enriches our community because having a diverse community improves the educational experience and work outcomes for all people by broadening our viewpoints and experiences that are represented in our different environments. It can also break down stereotypes, and it can make us better prepared to excel in the world in all of its diversity and complexity. I feel like we all win when our spaces are both accessible and inclusive. And I would just add that inclusion doesn't happen on its own magically or by leaving it up to the professionals. It's really a partnership across campus. We're only successful when we've developed the knowledge and the motivation in our entire community to make sure that everyone understands what's needed to be inclusive, and we're taking the steps to do so.
I love that, Kate, what you said about kind of our commitment to diversity and how accessibility ties into that. Speaking from like a perspective, thinking about digital accessibility, one of the ways we kind of help express that commitment, right? The university has a policy and says, hey, if you're building a website or you create a website, it needs to meet the latest accessibility standards, which is really important. Now, that doesn't make it happen automatically, just like you said, but it's a great kind of line in the sand and a marker that says, this is what we aspire to. We want every website that we build to be accessible to everybody. That's core to our teaching and research mission as a university, that we want to share the knowledge and the information that our awesome faculty and others build, and we want to share it with everybody in the world. And if we're excluding people with disabilities in that knowledge dissemination or sharing of work, then we're missing out on a huge component of the world, right? The people, 50 plus million in America, 1 billion worldwide, that have some form of disability who could both learn and also help contribute and be co-creators in new research and new knowledge.
I also want to say the ADA sets the floor for legal compliance of what we must do, but our job is to go beyond the floor and think about what should be done. What should we be doing for our disabled citizens of Harvard? What should we be doing to think about inclusion and access? And how do we push that agenda forward? How do we elevate the voices who are not heard, who are in some way marginalized by society? So that really is the work that we're doing.
Yeah, Grace, I would definitely echo and amplify what you said about the ADA being so important, but also it is the floor, right? That, you know, it is really, really important that we're not just meeting the standards of the ADA and then stopping, right? We need to go beyond and really understand how people are using our spaces, what people need to access on our websites, those kinds of things. It's not just about, you know, checking boxes. And so to build on that a little bit, if I can ask you, what has the ADA changed about your area of work? So in other words, what would the experiences of people with disabilities have looked like in the 90s when the ADA was passed compared to today?
I think my work would be radically different back in the 90s, because to start with, my office would not have existed. An office fully devoted to serving students with disabilities was rare, if it existed at all, at the passing of the ADA. Not that accommodations didn't exist, but dedicated offices such as the Accessible Education Office were few and far between. And now we're seeing fully staffed, fully dedicated professional offices that do the work of accessibility and accommodation implementation. So I think we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go as well. Our population has changed. We still have the same number of disabled citizens in the United States, as Dr. Charleston was saying. But now we have students who are identifying their disabilities at a much higher rate. I could say approximately 1 out of every 4, 1 out of every 5 students at Harvard has a visible or invisible disability. And many of those students will come to the Accessible Education Office to seek accommodations because something about their experience is not accessible. So it's our job to identify where is the gap between what exists and what the student needs, and how does an accommodation help mitigate that gap. I'll also say that our population of students with invisible disabilities, that means that the person has a disability that is not easily observable. That population has grown in self-disclosure. We have a large student population who identify as having a mental health disability. So we now have services such as CAMS and other resource offices on campus and support structures, accommodations for students who have mental health disabilities. We're working to destigmatize what it means to have a mental health condition, to normalize disability, make it more a part of the human experience. So I think in those aspects, we've really come a long way from seeing disability only as a visible condition, something that you must build a ramp to, there's a barrier structurally, you must build a ramp, or you need to add an elevator, which is what the ADA kind of started out accessibility wise. We were talking about building structures and transportation, the basic access in, and now we're broadening the definition of what accessibility means.
Kyle, could you speak to some of the other sort of broadening of what the definition of accessibility means, especially when it comes to technology?
Sure, it's a great question. So speaking of digital accessibility specifically, the world of technology and teaching and learning that we live in today in 2021 would be, unrecognizable in 1990 when the authors of the ADA wrote it and passed it into law. So we take the principles of requiring equal access and ensuring that everyone has equal opportunity, and apply that to the technology that is the cornerstone of so many of our learning experiences today. And it helps kind of guide us, right? The ADA does not need to specifically address the ones and zeros that we use in 2021, whereas we know we can't discriminate based on disability. Every single person with us live today or viewing the video, and every single person at the university, create some part of our digital footprint. almost everybody probably creates some email or some document that they have, or they might share some social media post, or turning in an assignment, or creating an assignment, or posting something on a website, or sharing a paper with someone. And all of those small kind of digital acts, if you will, are opportunities to promote inclusion and accessibility, or to set it back a little bit, right? To not be thinking about it up front, and then to have to go back and redo work again if we haven't considered accessibility from the start. So whether we're talking about complex modeling and data visualizations, or the document or an agenda for a meeting that you have every day, or something that you're posting on Instagram or Twitter, right? All of those things are opportunities, little opportunities every day for us to promote inclusion. And so I like to think that, again, the ADA has set kind of a floor or an expectation of how that's something that we should be thinking of all the time, but we all probably make hundreds and hundreds or thousands of decisions every day and every week that give us opportunities to kind of live up to that commitment.
Certainly.
I also wanted to add about, sorry, Kate, to interrupt, that accommodations have evolved as well with technology, as Kyle was saying, that we now have devices that can assist students with note taking where human note takers would have been required before. We're looking at accommodations in different ways to include not just the academic, but also housing and dining and transportation. So the full scope of disability accommodation is evolving along with our student needs.
Absolutely. And just to add to, the points that Kyle and Grace have made about all these ways that we've developed and changed over time, and the ADA has influenced the work that we do. There are a lot of other ways that the ADA has made significant changes. When it was passed, there's some requirements that new public transportation buses, for example, that came online needed to be made accessible. And it took, 10 to 15 years, because buses have a long shelf life, or last for around 10 to 15 years. But 10 to 15 years after the ADA was passed, we actually had any public transportation buses in this country were built with accessibility in mind at the outset, which is an amazing thing. Anyone who's moved around Boston knows that our T needs a little bit of work, but they're getting there. They're making progress, which is wonderful. It's also had huge impact with buildings. Any new building built after 1990 had to be made accessible from the built environment, from the design phase onward. And any building that was significantly renovated would also trigger obligations to be made more accessible. So older buildings gradually are coming online to be made more accessible. And then it's also had a huge impact on employees. We talked about student accommodations, and of course the digital environment really affects all of us these days, but employees as well, since 1990 have been entitled to accommodations for disabilities. And that even needed a little bit of tweaking. In 2008, Congress decided that the way that employers were treating disability and seeing who was entitled to accommodations was being narrowed, and the courts were actually supporting that narrowing. So Congress passed the ADA Amendments Act to reset how we were looking at disability and saying, really, we want to interpret this broadly. The point of the ADA is to allow people to be employees in our workspace and contribute and have access to our programs and activities. So don't create barriers by nitpicking over who is and is not a person with a disability. Instead, let's be open-minded here and try to find the way to accommodations. So that's been a huge change, that people have been entitled to accommodations in the workplace. I will say there's some additional work that's still needed, because in 2014, there were some estimates that the general employment rate in America was between 74 to 80%. But only 36% of people with disabilities were employed at that time. Well, that was several years ago, and we hope we're doing a little better now. But it is troubling that we had such low rates of employment for people with disabilities, although we've been trying to open things up with the ADA and accommodations.
Thank you for sharing that, Kate. And just on a personal note, just commenting on something Grace shared. I was a note taker as an undergrad for students with disabilities. And I also was a tutor, and just knowing now that there is better technology to do that, I could have spent more time doing the tutoring, not so much on the note taking, which is great to hear about those changes. I feel like there's always so much new technology becoming available and relevant for people with disabilities. So on another personal note, we're going to pause our panel discussion, and we asked some members of the Ability Plus group, which is a university-wide affinity group for employees with a disability and their allies, to share a bit about what the ADA has meant to them. So we have a short video to share. It's only about a minute long, with their thoughts from 3 staff members. And we are incredibly grateful for their willingness to share their experiences and thoughts with all of us today.
Michelle Gordon Seymour, she, her, hers.
Hi all, my name is Michelle Gordon Seymour. I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition and Diversity at Harvard University. Personally, as someone with a disability, the ADA provides me assurance and protection as I navigate through my life. In my professional role, I lead university-wide recruitment best practices, including inclusive hiring initiatives that strive to guarantee that people with disabilities have the same access to career opportunities as everyone else.
Raven Alexandra Herru, she, her.
Hello, I have Tourette syndrome, and so from an early age, when I was diagnosed at 7, I was taught by my parents that the ADA had my back, and if I wanted to do something, even if it required an accommodation, I had the right to do so, which in school meant getting longer times on test or a quiet space to have the test kick yourself for dollars. And while I'm working now at Harvard, I know that it means that I can ask for accommodations such as a quieter space or a flexible work arrangement if I need it, depending on how my tics are doing. Cats suck. Coupon.
Allie Armstrong, she, they.
The ADA matters to me because it's broken down barriers for people with disabilities, and I am eternally grateful to all of those who fought for this legislation for so many years.
So that was excellent. I'm so thankful for these staff members for sharing with us, and then also proud that Harvard has this Ability Plus campus group for people with disabilities and allies. I wondered, Grace, if you could comment and add a little bit more about how requests for accommodation have evolved since the ADA.
So I think accommodations have always been a need. They've always been a requirement. But again, I think that students feeling comfortable requesting accommodations has not always, the campus culture can inform that a bit. There are challenges and barriers that are put in place by policies and procedures in the way to access accommodations. So I think we've evolved in a way that we have opened the doors, even sometimes just slightly more, for students to feel comfortable requesting accommodations and knowing what their rights are in that access. Students don't always have access to the same level of medical care that their peers do. And so we work at the AEO to break down some of those procedural barriers if students don't have medical documentation on the front end to support their diagnosis, that we will work with those students and consult with them to find ways to provide access as they're getting the medical care that they need. So that's something that comes to mind, Amy.
Yeah. Kyle?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's awesome. And thank you to Michelle and Raven and Allie for sharing their stories. I'm too a member of the Ability Plus group. I'm a Harvard employee with a disability. And I'm certainly grateful, right, for the ADA that I can request accommodations when I need, whether that be to make sure I have screen reading technology or to make sure, a facilitator in a meeting might have, give me the materials so that I can fully participate, right? It's not just about allowing people to be consumers, but so that those of us who have been hired in positions at Harvard can contribute and do what we have been hired to do, which is, all we want to do, right? We want to equally participate under the law as required so that we can fully participate with all of our colleagues at the university.
Yeah, and Kyle, you mentioned earlier that your team at Harvard is pretty new. I wondered if you could share any information about, how any managers who are on the call might, make sure hiring processes are inclusive.
Totally. It really starts with a mindset and thinking and accounting for people with disabilities. If the first time you've thought about an accommodation or disability is when somebody's asking, you can totally deal with it as a manager, but it's obviously a little better if you've thought about it in advance or done a little bit of pre-planning or thought, what would I do if someone needed an accommodation? So Harvard Human Resources provides lots of information about what to do and how you can respond and meet the needs of employees if they request accommodations. And then thinking digitally, everybody who owns some sort of digital property at Harvard, whether that be a website or an application that might just track enrollment or manage a website or just be a communications tool. Those are all opportunities to where thinking about accessibility and the digital accessibility of those tools can ensure an inclusive environment so that if you hire staff with disabilities, and we hope that you do, that their working environment already has accessible, universally designed tools there for them, right? If I were to switch and work in a new part of the university and none of the tools that I needed to work with were accessible, that would make it difficult to transition, right? I probably could, and I could work on accommodations, but it can be difficult to re-engineer or reconsider things right in the moment. So every opportunity, like I mentioned earlier, that we create digital products or that we have meeting practices in our teams are opportunities to kind of think about accessibility from the start, and it can make it less of a big deal, right? If you're used to in meetings already saying things out loud, that's going to really help someone that might not see the screen or might not be able to see the front of the room if you're in person. And doing that no matter what, whether there's a person with a disability or not, it might help someone pay attention a little better. It might make sure that nothing's missed if someone was distracted, or if you have a blind employee show up, it's going to make sure that they're able to participate fully in the meeting. So little habits that we can build, whether it be in the physical environment or kind of just our processes and practices, or the digital environment, all of those kind of give us opportunities to build a foundation for inclusivity.
Totally, and I will add for myself, definitely when doing presentations, sharing information, reading the information on the slides. Sometimes, you make the slides and then you end up doing a lot of commentary, but it's really important to read the information on the slides and not make assumptions around who's in the audience, especially over Zoom. I think it becomes even more important. So what are some of the challenges that continue that you're all seeing, even though we are 31 years after the ADA has passed?
So I can go first. We talk a lot about the law and our processes and the technology, all of which is critically important. But I still think the biggest barriers we face are attitudinal. They are people's perspectives or unfamiliarity with disability or with working with people with disabilities or students with disabilities. So the more that we are able to think about and include people with disabilities, I think that can break down some assumptions and some barriers that might be there and make it easier to conceive of, if you've never had somebody that needs a mobility aid, like a wheelchair or a walker or something, in your team, you may not have considered all of the use cases of somebody in a really old building on campus. Or if you haven't had someone that needed to use a screen reader before, you may have made some assumptions about what's accessible or what's not in your working environment. So I think really kind of starting from an openness about what people with disabilities might need and how accommodating and making space for and thinking about accessibility proactively can be something exciting and welcoming and inclusive. Oftentimes myself, showing some biases, right, has sometimes thought of kind of diversity and inclusion and equity work as something like people facing, if you will. And so people in IT often have jobs where they're building digital products, and thinking about that inclusion on the digital things that we build gives us an opportunity every day with every code update or every push to kind of be advancing that movement towards inclusion.
I can just go off what Kyle said about physical accessibility on campus and how our campus doesn't always appear to be the most accessible place for students. I often work with incoming first-year students who are asking questions about, can I get into the building? Can I get into the library? I noticed there are so many stairs. Is there an elevator? Are the elevators accessible? Are the restrooms accessible? How do I find my way from one building to the next? And so I think we have work to do on wayfinding, on physical building accessibility. I know that Harvard has undergone a huge project in renovating the houses that students live in undergrad, and that this is an ongoing project. It started over 10 years ago, and each house is going offline so it can be renewed and brought up to code and brought up to ADA standards. So we are making progress, though sometimes it doesn't feel like it's fast enough for our students who are only here for a short period of time.
I would just add one other thought on what's still a challenge in this space is, I think, awareness. Although it's been 31 years since we've had this law put in place, I think people are still not always super cognizant of what they should be doing to make sure that it's followed. So, for example, there are these wonderful design standards for physical spaces that tell us what you need to do to make sure a space is physically accessible. And nonetheless, sometimes I've seen architects not actually build new construction that's accessible, which is just a tragedy. And same thing for the digital environment. We have a lot of software companies and apps that promote, oh, we're fully accessible, we comply with the WCAG standards or whatever standard they're talking about. And then it comes down to the use case. And in fact, we find it's not really accessible, and it's because perhaps they've not really paid attention to the detailed requirements in those design standards. So I think it's awareness of, how important it is to be attentive to all of those details. And the other way I think that awareness sometimes plays into things is sometimes people with new diagnoses might be entitled to accommodations, but might not realize that their change in status triggers that right for them. So for example, students who are college age are in the prime time for mental health concerns to show up. And someone who's newly diagnosed with depression or anxiety might not necessarily realize I can receive accommodations that can help me access my classes and achieve full engagement in that. Or someone who has a later in life diagnosis might not realize I now am entitled to accommodations that will help me to do my job. So that's another way I think that awareness plays into things.
Kate, and that actually I think is a good place to transition into some of the Q&A questions that have come in over the chat. So I would encourage anyone else who is on the call to please add your questions into the Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar. But one of the first questions actually that is a good follow-up to what you were just talking about is what accommodations can be done for someone with ADD or ADHD or a panic or anxiety disorder?
Grace, do you want to take that one? Or sometimes spacing things out.
I was reading it along with Amy. Sorry for the delay. So accommodations for someone with ADD, ADHD, or an anxiety disorder. What's the question? And we handle each accommodation request, each student, each person on an individualized basis. So we don't have set accommodations for different diagnoses. I just want to put that out there first, but I can definitely list some examples of accommodations that may be helpful, acknowledging first that everyone's experience is different. Many students who have attention deficit disorders struggle with time management, with note-taking in class, or even focusing on tests and exams. It may take them a bit longer to complete an exam. So accommodations such as extended time for tests in a quiet environment, or the use of earplugs or headphones during a test to kind of block out the noise. Those are accommodations. People don't always think about something as simple as a pair of earplugs as an accommodation, but it is. Note-taking strategies. Students can visit our the ARC, the Academic Resource Center, and work with an academic coach to learn note-taking strategies, but also receive accommodations through the AEO of note-taking technology tools, apps, and smart pens that can assist them as they're paying attention to their lecture. They could also be recording or color coding bits of the lecture that they can review later on. So those are some examples that come to mind. Panic disorders were named, as well as other mental health disabilities. Sometimes students just need an accommodation to take a break, the ability to walk out of class, to take a few minutes, or to have flexibility in their courses so that they can go to therapy or have extra time to complete assignments and not be punished for taking that additional time or needing that flexibility. So we work with faculty and students individually to determine what is reasonable for flexibility in the courses. How can students still meet the standards of the class, but have the accommodations that they need?
Thanks, Grace. We have a couple of questions about staff as well. So one question is, what can be done or how much work is done to ensure managers are aware of invisible disabilities and differences in staff members to foster multiple various lines of support to employees?
Well, I can say that as a new employee at Harvard and a manager, I'm taking the universal management training, and disability is a part of it. And you know, there is training there on thinking through what might be termed these less visible disabilities. And so that is part of a training that's offered. Additionally, UDR my office offers trainings that are available to different members of the Harvard community. And we do train around accommodations, and we also train around, for example, disability etiquette, how to run an accessible meeting. So we have a variety of different ways that we try to share information in the community around those things. And the baseline encouragement for managers is to please, work with human resources and work with UDR in terms of figuring out accommodations, but let's try and find ways that we can support our employees so that they're able to do their best work. I think that's the underlying theme.
Great. And then there is another question kind of about on the same similar topic of staff training, and how can both staff and managers engage on a local level within their department or unit to educate their teams about the ADA, accessibility, all these different kinds of things. And just like, are there any other training opportunities or ways to educate at the local level?
Yeah. I can chime in specifically about digital accessibility. There are, of course, many others. So I put a link, but our digital accessibility website is accessibility.hewitt.harvard.edu. And there are tons of resources, including lots of different training opportunities. And one of the things my team does is they'll come run any training that we offer for content creators, for developers, for foundational concepts, including some of the history of disability rights, for testing or for creating documents. And we'll come run that for your department and allow you to have conversations and talk about the context of your specific department and what you do and the work that you do and how it applies. So there are many core concepts that are important to digital accessibility, to providing accommodations grounded in the ADA, but everybody doesn't need to be a mini lawyer in order to provide accommodations or to build inclusive environments, right? Like just knowing some of the kind of key concepts that our many different offices will train you on or have conversations with gets you a long way, and that will help you and Harvard fulfill obligations under the ADA, but you don't need to be dissecting a law or to feel like it's law. It's just good inclusive practices that also happen to help us meet legal requirements where they may exist.
I'll also add that we have a national organization. It's the Association of Higher Education and Disability, AHD, and there is a wealth of resources on their website and available at both local and national conferences every year. So if you're interested in learning more about disability and higher education, I would recommend that your group look into that organization, because I learn new things all the time. And I'm an active member of AHD.
So there is one question specific to the libraries. So someone asked, how are the libraries handling the accessibility of resources that are bundled and subscription based? And what are you hopeful about on this front moving forward? So I will share that our electronic resources team has a series of checks that they go through when we are bringing on new e-resources or in discussions with vendors. We also always check if vendors have what's called a VPAT, which is a voluntary product accessibility template, and are able just to ask questions about the accessibility of products, especially when there is a new feature. I think that's really, really important when you're working with any kind of vendor, you know, asking if it is keyboard accessible, asking if they've done testing with assistive technology, and just gauging what their answer is. If they have a great answer, you can feel confident about, you know, they're aware of accessibility. But I had a vendor once I remember speaking with and asked, is your product accessible? And they were like, yeah, it works on Android and iPhone. And I was like, well, they're not really understanding my question. So I wanted to make sure. The other thing is just making sure you have your own working definition of accessibility. There is, you know, one available on the UDR site, on the digital accessibility site. So I think just having those conversations and making sure to bring it up with any kind of vendor is really important. So one other question that came in is just a little bit more practical. So what are some common instances that you've seen of people overlooking something to make something accessible? So like I mentioned before, like even just like reading out your slides, or like something like just a practical tip that people who are here today could walk away with.
I'll let Kyle speak to the digital part of things, but just one quick thing that comes to mind, and I see it all the time, is a lot of pathways and passages through physical space are designed to be wide, particularly so that they can accommodate someone in a wheelchair or someone who's using some other sort of device assistance to move. And I see all the time that people don't really pay attention to that, and they narrow the pathway by maybe moving a table into the space, or trash cans, or cones, and it just destroys someone's ability to move through that space. There was actually a really dangerous instance I heard about recently. A woman in, I think Pittsburgh, was in a wheelchair and crossing the street, and the curb cut was actually blocked by a delivery robot that was being tested, and that, you know, blockage of access can be quite dangerous. She had oncoming traffic and was really in a dangerous position because of that access being blocked. So common thing that I see.
Yeah, that's so scary. I think we have time for maybe one more tip from Kyle or Grace.
Sure, I will be happy to give two, and I'll put the link in the chat, and they're both very short. So the first is, in this highly digital or hybrid environment, one way that we can make more inclusive meetings is by having them captioned. Today, this meeting is being captioned professionally by a captioner, which is awesome. But everybody can turn on a feature, whether they're using Teams or Zoom, that can use AI captioning, which is a great way to at least raise the floor when we talk about accessibility. And I put a link to our IT help article on how you can turn that on and just in one click, at least have automated captioning, which is not going to meet everybody's need, but it helps make things more accessible. And the second is for every document you create, there's a button in it, no matter what platform you're using, where you can check the document's accessibility to be a little more inclusive. And I'll put a link where there's information on our DAS accessibility website where you can find out how to do more.
I can just finish up real quick with, we can all be mindful of the language that we use. Are we using words like stupid? Are we using words that refer to mental illness in a negative way, whether we intend it or not? To say, I'm so OCD because you're particular about things, that can be damaging to people who have those diagnoses. So be mindful of the words that you use, and how can you be more inclusive just in your language and your interactions day to day, and call out people who may be using words that are not inclusive. So, Kate?
Can I just build on that? There's actually the National Center on Disability and Journalism has a disability style guide. So anyone who's thinking about how to be really inclusive in their language, please look that up. I'm putting it into the chat for everyone. It's a great resource.
Great. Thank you all for sharing those. All right, so I think that wraps up our panel discussion. I'd like to thank all the participants and presenters today, President Larry Bacow, Dr. Sherri Charleston, our panelists, Grace, Kate, and Kyle, as well as our colleagues from the Abilities Plus group, Michelle, Raven, and Allie, for sharing their stories, as well as our colleagues in Hewitt who helped to plan and do all the logistics for this event, Amy Vest, Nita Pandy, and Eric Manser, and as well as our live captioner. Thank you very much. And you will be getting a follow-up email with a link to the recording and contact information. We are all available and happy to discuss these topics further. So thanks all. Have a good rest of your day.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks.